Come with me. A lonely giant rancher bought her for $3, but she taught him what no man in the plains ever knew. Love. Dakota Badlands, 1888. The sun barely pierced through the thick cloud cover draping the jagged mesas outside Settler's Bluff. Wind swept down from the bluffs, cutting sharp through the bones, but it did nothing to silence the crowd gathered at the edge of the scrubland. Beneath a tattered canvas tent and a crooked wooden post, reading "Goods and Labor," no questions asked. Voices roared over cattle wagons and moonshine deals. It was not a marketplace built for sunlight or law. This was where things were traded no decent man wanted to speak of. Caleb Thorne stood apart from the noise, his shoulders hunched beneath a heavy buffalo hide duster, one gloved hand tucked into a leather satchel. At 42, the former range scout and trapper looked more prairie than man, silent, scarred, and solitary. His only companion was a blade, half-dulled, and a past he had not spoken of in years. He had come for a whetstone and spare blade, nothing more. He told himself that 3 times as he walked past crates of rusted tools and bolts of stolen cloth. But then came the voice. White girl, 24, strong hips, has a baby. No husband, no disease, no price set. Caleb slowed. The seller, a greasy man with a busted lip and whiskey breath, gestured to a ragged woman standing beneath a swaying lantern. She clutched a bundled infant to her chest. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, her feet bare in the cold mud. No one stepped forward. She got thrown out of Prairie Hollow, the man added louder now. Not even the mayor's boy wanted to claim her when she turned up with that brat. A few men chuckled. Most turned away. Caleb stared. The woman, Ilara, stood stiff, not trembling. Her face was pale, but fierce, a strange kind of stillness wrapped in shame and dignity both. The baby let out a small, stifled cry, and one of the handlers moved forward. We could separate them, he said with a grin. Lady in Dry Gulch wants an infant. Just the infant? No. Ilara's voice cracked sharp through the noise. She stepped back, shielding the baby. Please take me, not her. The handler grabbed her arm. The baby wailed. Caleb moved. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He reached into his satchel, pulled out $3 silver, and dropped them into the mud with a dull clink. Come with me, he said. The handler stopped. The seller blinked. Ilara looked up. Her eyes met Caleb's across 10 feet of frozen ground, blood and firelight and breath between them. She did not cry. She did not beg. She only stared as if trying to measure the cost of this man, this stranger with her last fragment of pride. Her eyes held no fear, no hope, just the weary defiance of someone who had nothing left to lose and refused to lose with lowered eyes. Caleb extended his hand. He did not speak again. Ilara looked down at the baby in her arms. Then she stepped forward. The seller laughed nervously. You want the woman and the baby. $3 don't cover both. Caleb turned. The cold in his voice could have cut bark from prairie oak. Take another step toward her, and I will show you what I bought in the war for free. The seller stepped back. Ilara stood beside Caleb now, trembling, not from fear, but from the enormity of what she had just chosen. Caleb nodded once and placed his other hand gently on her back, not to guide, not to claim, but to shield. They walked out of the camp without looking back. The baby's cries quieted against her mother's shoulder. The coins lay buried in mud, and behind them, silence fell for a moment in a place where silence never stayed. They did not yet know each other's names, but from that moment they no longer walked alone. Snow fell heavy that afternoon, blanketing the path to the ridge in white silence. Caleb led the mule slowly up the incline, his boots crunching through drifts, one hand holding the reins, the other gently supporting Ilara's elbow. She walked beside him, barely upright, the baby tucked against her chest beneath Caleb's heavy coat. He had draped it over her without a word, and she had been too cold, too numb to refuse it. They didn't speak. Caleb did not ask where she had come from. He did not press for names or explanations. And Alara, for the first time in weeks, felt no expectation to explain her existence. By the time the cabin appeared through the trees, dusk was descending. A curl of smoke rose from the chimney. The house itself was simple, built from sturdy oak logs, small, with one shutter hanging half loose, and a door darkened by years of sun and storm. But to Alara, it looked like shelter carved out of the very bones of the earth. Caleb pushed the door open and motioned for her to enter. Inside it was warm, dim, and orderly. A fire smoldered in the hearth, casting soft light on rough furniture and a modest bed tucked behind a curtain. "Sit," Caleb said, nodding toward the rocker near the fire. Alara obeyed, easing down with a hiss of pain. Her feet throbbed. Her arms ached from holding Lily so tightly for so long. Caleb disappeared into the small kitchen space, moving without noise. He lit a lamp, filled a kettle, and began to prepare something in a cast-iron pot. Alara's head began to droop. She blinked hard, fighting the pull of sleep. "You can rest," Caleb said softly. She opened her mouth to protest, but her body betrayed her. Her arms slackened, the baby stirred, and before she could stop it, her eyes closed. When she awoke, it was to the soft crackle of the fire and the scent of warm oats. Her heart pounded as she sat upright, and then froze. Lily was gone. She looked wildly around until her eyes landed on the figure in the chair across from her. Caleb sat with the baby asleep on his chest, cradled against the thick flannel of his shirt. His arms were folded around her, gently, steady. His head was tipped back, eyes closed. Lily's tiny hand was tangled in his beard. One of her fingers pulled at the coarse hair near his chin. Caleb stirred slightly, then quietly, so quietly, chuckled, a sound like a bull's rumble, but softer. Alara stared. She hadn't heard a man laugh without cruelty in a long, long time. She waited, watched. Her heart both thundered and calmed. Lily let out a breath and drooled onto Caleb's shirt. Alara leaned forward and whispered, "Don't take her." "She's all I have." Caleb's eyes opened. They were not surprised, just calm, steady, like still water beneath ice. "I'm not taking her," he said. "She's with you. You're both with me." Alara's breath caught. He adjusted his grip on the baby, now dozing like a kitten, and added, "You can both stay until you don't want to." His voice was low. Sure. No strings, no promises, no pity. Alara nodded slowly. She did not say thank you. Words felt too small for the moment. Later, he handed her a steaming bowl of oats with honey. She fed Lily a little, then ate slowly herself. The warmth seeped into her limbs, into the raw places inside her chest. Caleb rolled out a second blanket and set up a cot beside the hearth. He gave it to Alara without a word. Then he returned to the rocker and sat again. Lily curled once more in the hollow between his arm and side. Alara lay down staring at the ceiling of thick beams overhead. Her body still ached, but her heart didn't hammer like it had every night since Prairie Hollow. The fire popped. Caleb shifted. Lily made a sound like a bird sighing. Alara turned her head, looked across the firelight, and there they were. Her child, and a man she didn't know except that he had not asked for anything and had given everything. Outside, the wind howled against the eaves. Inside, they slept. The snow didn't let up for weeks. It fell heavy and constant, burying trails, weighing down pine limbs, silencing the prairie. In that stillness, inside a cabin wedged between cliff and creek, something quiet and alive began to grow. Caleb taught Alara the rhythm of winter in the wild, how to feed the stove without choking smoke, how to set snares for rabbits, how to listen for the whistle of cracking ice. He rarely said much, but he always watched her hands, correcting with gentle taps instead of words. Alara learned fast. Her strength was quiet, her focus sharp, though she still flinched at sudden sounds. Indoors, she found an old basket of torn linens and mended them one by one. She patched Caleb's worn duster, reinforced the knees of his pants, and finally stitched her own fraying dress with a needle from a carved wooden box, once his wife's. Caleb noticed but said nothing. Instead, he made sure Thread was always nearby. Lily became the center of their small world. She giggled, grabbed everything, and filled the silence with joy. Her laugh was sudden, bright, like a bird startled into song. She followed Ilara's every move, and when she tugged Caleb's beard with glee, something shifted. He laughed out loud for the first time in a decade. One morning, while Ilara made tea, Caleb sat at the table, quietly carving. She watched without speaking. 2 hours later, he set a small wooden spoon on the counter, sanded smooth, curved just right. The name Lily was carved into the handle in clean block letters. Ilara touched it with her thumb. "Thank you," she whispered, "not just for the spoon." Caleb only shrugged and stepped out to split more wood. On another night, when the wind bit deeper than usual, Caleb went into storage and pulled out his old duster. He cut strips from a flannel blanket and stitched them into the lining. When he finished, he didn't explain. He simply hung it on the peg closest to Ilara's bed. But not everything softened like flannel. One afternoon, Ilara slipped on the trail, twisting her ankle and slicing her hand on a branch. When Caleb found her, she was hobbling home, breath fogging in the frozen air. He said nothing, just lifted her in his arms and carried her back inside. He wrapped her ankle in pine salve and cleaned the cut on her arm. As he rolled up her sleeve, his hands froze. A long, sharp scar ran down her forearm. Old, jagged, intentional. Ilara didn't meet his eyes. "They said I brought it on myself," she murmured. "Said I walked too free, smiled too much. The boy who hurt me, his father was the deacon. They called me a temptation." The fire cracked. Caleb didn't move. "They said it was a mistake," she added. "Mine. I was 16 inches. Caleb set the salve aside. He took a cloth, dipped it in warm water, and pressed it gently to the skin around the scar. Not the wound, the years around it. "You never needed saving," he said quietly. Ilara's gaze flicked up. Wet, but fierce. "You just needed someone who wouldn't walk away." She didn't cry. She simply stilled. Her breath deepened. Her hands resting in her lap finally opened. She hadn't told anyone that story. Not fully. Not since the day they'd banished her from town, but here in the cabin's firelight, it wasn't judged. It wasn't rejected. Caleb rose, crossed to the hearth, and took up a piece of wood and his knife. Not to carve, just to steady his hands. Ilara watched him for a long time. Then slowly, she pulled the patched coat from the peg and wrapped it around her shoulders. Outside, the snow fell again, but inside, something warmer had begun. Something that this time might stay. The snow had begun to melt into slush by late March, when the first sign of trouble rode up the bluffs. A pair of riders came through the edge of the trees, one in a heavy wool coat too fine for the weather, the other thin, pale, and reeking of entitlement. Caleb saw them from the chopping stump and knew immediately nothing good rode that trail. The second man dismounted stiffly, glancing at the trees like they offended him. His face was clean-shaven, too smooth for this rough land. His boots were polished. He carried a folded piece of paper and a look of disdain. Ilara came out with a bucket of water, then froze. Her breath caught. Her hands dropped the bucket. "Silas," she said. The man smiled, not kindly. "Hello, Ilara. Heard you'd made quite a home up here with my daughter." The word hit like a blow. Caleb moved beside her, silent. The man beside Silas stepped forward and unfolded the paper. "My name is Attorney Blackburn. I represent Mr. Silas Blackwood. We've come to retrieve his biological child, Lily. Her mother, yourself, has been reported as having removed the child without paternal consent." Ilara stepped back. "I didn't run. You cast me out, called me filth." "Be that as it may," Blackburn said, smoothing the page. "You'll find this affidavit is signed by Justice Davies in Redwood Pass. If you don't relinquish the child, you'll be in violation of custodial interference statutes, which can be prosecuted." Caleb's jaw flexed once. He said nothing, not yet. Silas smiled again, the kind of smile that mocked both law and love. "I'm just here for my daughter. You've had your time." Ilara's hands clenched. That night, Caleb sat by the fire holding the document in his hand. He read every word. Then he stood and saddled his horse. "Where are you going?" Elara asked, voice tight. Caleb looked at her. "To find someone who saw what happened and someone who remembers what kind of man he really is." It took 3 days. He rode through mud and rain to a town called Juniper Creek, where the old deacon who had once taught Silas lived now, blind in one eye, but sharp in memory. Reverend McCoy listened quietly as Caleb explained. Then he simply said, "He lied to the whole town and the church paid to keep it quiet. I'll testify." From there, Caleb rode north to a weathered cabin where an ex-investigator named Garrison had retired. Garrison had once followed the Blackwood family for a land fraud case, unrelated to Elara, but close enough that he remembered the name. When Caleb told him what Silas was doing now, Garrison narrowed his eyes. "I kept copies. And I've got one letter from a girl sent to me in 1881 about that bastard's threats. She disappeared after. I can help." Caleb rode home with the wind behind him, but Silas had not waited. On the 5th morning, a carriage wound up the trail, too slow for surprise but too loud to ignore. Elara stood in the doorway, clutching Lily tight to her chest. The baby squirmed, sensing tension. Caleb opened the cabin door and stepped outside. Silas dismounted, followed by Blackburn. "I've been patient," Silas said, walking straight toward the porch. "Now hand her over." Caleb stood between them. "No, she's mine." Caleb's voice did not rise. "She's not yours. She's never been." Silas laughed, a sound like coins hitting dirt. "You think some bearded rancher gets to decide that?" From behind Caleb, a sharp voice rang out. Elara stepped forward, eyes blazing. "You never wanted her until she gave you something to control." Silas turned, startled. "You left me in blood," she went on. "You left your child in the dirt. You spat on her name, and now you want to claim her." She held Lily tighter, as if daring the wind itself to challenge her. "I'd rather burn this prairie down than hand her to you." The air snapped. Before Silas could reply, hoofbeats echoed again. 3 riders, Garrison, Reverend McCoy, and behind them a deputy from Redwood Pass holding a sealed letter. The deputy dismounted, took one look at the confrontation and said, "Mr. Blackwood, Justice Davies has revoked your order pending further investigation. There's credible evidence of coercion and past misconduct." Silas looked stunned, then furious. Garrison handed the deputy a folder. 20 pages, witness names, 3 women. You'll want to read it. Reverend McCoy stepped up beside Caleb. "I remember who he was, and I remember what she suffered. You'd do well not to forget." Silas turned, teeth clenched. Blackburn grabbed his arm. "It's over," the lawyer muttered. "For now." They left in silence. That night, the cabin glowed warm again. Caleb sat beside the hearth, Lily curled in his lap. Elara knelt beside them, tears tracing her cheeks, but she was smiling. Not out of victory, out of something deeper. For once, no one had walked away. The days after Silas's failed attempt to take Lily passed in silence and sleepless nights. Inside the cabin, a different storm stirred. Lily, once light in their days, burned with fever. "She has not eaten," Elara said, kneeling beside her cot. It was too much what she saw. Caleb brought a basin of cool water, soaking a cloth, and placing it on her brow. "She is too small to carry fear like that," he murmured. "We will take it from her." He sat by her through the night, boots off, shirt loosened. Elara, too tired to cry, drifted in and out in the corner chair. At one point, Lily whimpered and reached. Caleb leaned in, letting her fingers graze his beard. She calmed. That was enough. By dawn, her fever broke, but the threat outside had not passed. 2 days later, Garrison returned soaked with sleet, holding a bundle of affidavits and a yellowed paper. In 1881, Silas's father paid 2 witnesses $300 each, bribery to change testimony. I found this misfiled in a county ledger. He handed Caleb the paper. "It's enough to push back." Caleb nodded. "Then we do." Reverend McCoy, despite failing eyesight, rode into town the next day to sign a sworn statement. "I saw what happened. I know what was done. God may forgive, but truth does not forget." Garrison filed a petition seeking to revoke Silas's paternal rights and protect Ilara and Lily from further harm. When the court date came, the thaw had begun, but the air still stung. They rode into Redwood Pass, Ilara holding Lily close, Caleb silent beside them. The courthouse was squat and gray. Inside it buzzed with quiet anticipation. Silas was already seated, smug in a trimmed coat, his lawyer whispering in his ear. Ilara sat firm, Lily in her lap. When called, Silas stood. "I acted only to reclaim my child. I was told she had died." "Had I known, spared her," Ilara interrupted, rising, heads turned. "I was 17. He called me temptation, then denied her. When I spoke, he made them call it shame." She looked at Lily, then met the judge's eyes. "You called me a sin. She is not a sin. She is my salvation." The judge, silver-haired and stern, held up the bribery receipt. "This," she said, "is not innocence. This is cowardice with money." She turned to Ilara. "You raised this child when no one stood with you. You protected her without the law's help, and you came here for peace, not vengeance." The gavel came down. Custody of Silas Blackwood is terminated. Ilara Thorne is recognized as sole legal guardian. This court recommends further investigation into coercion and misconduct. The room fell still. Silas said nothing as he left. His name broken, his claim dissolved. Outside, the air felt different, as if something heavy had finally been lifted. Ilara clutched Lily close and kissed her cheek. The child smiled, innocent of what had just been won. That night, back in the cabin, the frost clung to the roof, but the fire inside burned steady. Ilara undressed Lily, washed her small hands, and placed her in the cradle near the hearth. Then she turned. Caleb was stirring the stew, quiet as ever, as though standing between them and ruin had been just another day. Ilara moved to the table and paused. A folded paper lay tucked beneath the wooden spoon Caleb had carved. She opened it. The handwriting was uneven. Ink blotched where the pen had rested too long. It read, "For Ilara, who was never owned, only chosen." She pressed it to her chest. Her breath shuddered out full and warm, and for the first time in years, the silence within her did not ache. It was peace. The wildflowers came in slow that spring, peeking through the last patches of snow that clung to the northern shade of the pines. But Caleb noticed them before Ilara did. Small yellow and white daisy-like petals, pushing stubbornly through thawed soil, just like the ones Ilara often tucked behind Lily's ear when they walked the ridge behind the cabin. He did not say anything about it. Instead, one morning after his hunt, Caleb returned with a seed pouch and a weathered spade. He spent the day turning patches of earth in a wide, uneven ring around the cabin, softening soil where it had never been touched. Lily toddled after him, hands clapping when she recognized the tiny buds. Ilara watched from the porch, her fingers curled around a steaming tin of tea, her smile quiet and full. That spring, wildflowers grew wild around their home, not because they belonged there, but because someone made room for them. Inside the cabin, change came just as gently. Caleb had carved a small shelf from pine and nailed it above the hearth. On it rested the handful of books Ilara had brought with her from town, a primer, a worn volume of poetry, a set of folk tales. Ilara used them to teach Lily her letters, sounding out syllables with patience and pride. Before long, other children came. Neighbors miles apart, their mothers drawn to Ilara's easy voice and steady hand. Twice a week, they filled the small cabin with scattered shoes and laughter. Caleb would retreat outside to chop wood or whittle near the edge of the tree line, but he always listened. There was music in the mess of it. One afternoon, Ilara found him carving small stools from leftover wood. "For the children," he said without looking up. That night, when Lily finished tracing her name in the ash dust near the fireplace, she pointed to the shelf. More stories, Mama. Ilara looked at Caleb. He stood and reached for the old storybook, its spine barely holding. Only if your mother picks the tale. So Ilara did. And when her voice trembled on the first page, Caleb picked up where she left off, and they all laughed when he mispronounced the name of a fairy. Days turned into weeks, snowmelt gave way to budding trees. The cabin, once only a shelter, had become something more. Then one evening, after the last child had gone, after Lily was asleep in her small bed beneath the window, Ilara came in from the porch. Her cheeks were touched with the last pink light of sunset, her braid undone at the end. She found Caleb at the hearth stirring embers with the iron poker. Something glinted on the stone mantel above the fire. She stepped closer. It was a ring, not of gold, not of silver. It was wood carved from prairie oak, the grain dark and smooth around the inside curve, faint and careful. He had etched a pattern, a daisy stem curling into the letter E. She looked from it to Caleb. He did not turn. "I saw the branch down by the creek," he said. "It had fallen. I figured no one would miss it." She lifted the ring with careful fingers, held it flat in her palm. It was warm from the fire and light. "Does this mean I'm yours?" she asked quietly. He finally looked at her. His eyes were steady, unshaken, the way she remembered them, the day he had thrown down $3 without flinching. "No," he said, voice low. He took one step closer. "It means I'm yours." The words hung there, softer than firelight. She swallowed. Then she smiled and slid the ring onto her finger. There was no kiss that night, no vows spoken, just the smell of wood smoke and the soft breath of a child asleep. But as Caleb returned to his chair and Ilara to hers, they sat closer than before, close enough to share the same blanket, close enough that neither had to reach far to touch the other's hand. Outside, the daisies bent in the breeze. Inside, there was no ceremony, only something stronger, the quiet certainty of those who had once been lost and had now chosen and been chosen in return. By the end of summer, the cabin had changed. The plains still whispered, and the pines still stood tall, but now smoke from the chimney meant more than fire. It meant life. Laughter carried from the porch, and above the gate hung a new wooden sign, carved by Caleb's hand. Home of the Thorns, Caleb, Ilara, and Lily. He had set it before sunrise, stepping back in the gray light, arms crossed, heart still. He had not asked Ilara first, but when she saw it, she traced the grooves and said softly, "You finally let the world know." Word spread slow through the hills, as it always did. A passing ranch hand mentioned the cabin with the quiet man and the woman who taught reading. By fall, folks began coming. One or two at first, a man with fever, a boy with a broken arm, an old widow who needed tea and talk more than medicine. Ilara welcomed each one with calm eyes and warm bread. Caleb mended what he could, offered plain advice. They asked for nothing in return. Soon the cabin wasn't just a home. It was a place people trusted. Ilara started baking extra loaves, tying them with twine, sending them off with travelers. Each came with a note. "This one's still warm. Share it while it is." Children brought baskets for reading days. Parents stayed longer, asking how Ilara knew so much. She only smiled. "I learned when I had to." Lily grew in the heart of it all, wild as the trees, brave as the wind. She trailed Caleb through the prairie, naming herbs and birds, her laughter echoing like chimes. One night she climbed into his lap with a piece of twine. "I want ribbon," she said, twirling it. "Blue, like Mama's eyes." Ilara chuckled. "Ribbon, is it?" Lily nodded solemnly. That night, Caleb lay awake, staring at the beams. It had been 12 years since he'd gone to town. The next morning, he saddled the mule. "I'll be back before supper," he said. Ilara raised an eyebrow. "You're going into town?" He nodded. "Something I need." She didn't press, just tucked a small list in his pocket. "We could use more sugar." Town was loud, full of wagons and boots. At the dry goods store, Caleb found the ribbon. Blue satin, soft and bright. He stared at it too long. "You got a little girl?" the shopkeeper asked kindly. Caleb nodded. The man packed the spool with care. Caleb returned at dusk. Lily ran to meet him, eyes wide. "Did you get it?" He crouched, pulled out the ribbon. She gasped, clutching it like treasure. On the porch, Ilara waited, hands dusted with flour. Caleb handed her the rest, sugar, soap, and a book she had once said she missed. "You remembered," she said, quiet. "I remember everything," he replied. That night, Lily slept with her hair tied in a crooked bow. Her smile didn't fade, even in dreams. Caleb sat with Ilara on the porch. No words, just the sound of crickets, the creak of wood, and two people who once had nothing, now watching their daughter sleep through a window trimmed in ribbon. No preacher, no papers, no ring. But there was bread on the sill, laughter in the rafters, and a sign that no longer marked silence, but a family's home. 10 years passed, and the seasons no longer felt like trials to endure. The cabin by the plains stood unchanged in structure, though the wood had darkened and the roof saw 2 repairs. Wildflowers crept across the steps in spring, and in winter smoke curled from the chimney like a ribbon of belonging. Lily Thorne was 11, tall, curious, and fiercely bright. Her favorite spot was a stump beneath an aspen tree, where she sketched deer, pine needles, and shafts of sunlight on scraps of paper. Quiet drawings, never cold. She had Caleb's stillness and Ilara's fire. Caleb walked slower these days, beard streaked with gray, shoulders softened. Yet his eyes, pine green and steady, still warmed any room. He spent mornings sharpening tools, carving shelves, repairing fences. Afternoons were for teaching Lily how to track rabbits and read the forest signs. He waited each evening on the porch until the crunch of Ilara's boots signaled her return. She greeted him every night with a kiss that felt like home. One golden evening, Lily placed her latest drawing on the table, a stag by a river bend, its reflection clear beneath it. Below, in careful handwriting, "Not every wild thing runs." Ilara's breath caught. Caleb picked up the paper. "She gets that from you," he said softly. Ilara smiled. "She gets it from both of us." Later by the fire, Lily snuggled in a corner with her book. Caleb polished his old axe, and Ilara threaded ribbon through a new comb. The fire popped. Lily closed the book and asked, "Mom, yes, baby, why did you stay?" After he said, "Come with me. Why did you never leave?" Ilara laid down her work, looked into the fire. When he said, "Come with me," he wasn't saving me. She said he was choosing me. Lily tilted her head. "What's the difference?" Ilara brushed her daughter's cheek. "If someone saves you, you owe them something. But if someone chooses you, you owe them nothing. You're just wanted just as you are." Lily glanced at Caleb. "Did you choose me too?" "You?" He nodded. "From the moment your mama put you in my arms." Lily beamed. "Good, 'cause I'm not going anywhere." Ilara laughed and reached for the kettle. Later, after Lily's hair was braided and she slept warm from the fire, Ilara and Caleb sat beneath the stars, mugs in hand, the prairie alive with night sounds. "You remember that day?" she asked. "The marketplace?" She nodded. "You looked at me like I was a wolf," he said quietly, "and you looked at me like I wasn't broken." He chuckled. "You never were." Ilara leaned into him. "You think she'll be all right?" "She already has," Caleb said, "better than either of us ever did." Silence fell above the stars, scattered like memories. The moon rose over distant mesas. Inside, beside Lily's bed, that small wooden spoon still rested. Her name carved into the handle, faded but proud. Above the doorframe, nearly worn smooth, one line remained. For Ilara, who was never owned, only chosen. Lily understood then. Love didn't arrive loud. It didn't demand vows or pageantry. It lived in quiet actions, carved in wood, and carried through winters. It was in the man who once spoke only to cattle and now tied ribbons in his daughter's hair. It was in the woman who stood alone in a marketplace and found her way home to a porch full of light. It was in the family who once lost to the wild had found each other instead, not to be saved, but to be loved. If this story touched your heart, if Alara's courage, Caleb's quiet strength, and little Lily's laughter made you believe in love again, then there are more tales waiting for you. Subscribe to Prairie Heart Romances for powerful romances born from dust and danger, where hearts don't just survive, they rise. Until the next story. Remember, the wild plains wasn't just lawless, it was fearless enough to love.